And I suppose the big question now is what impact will that have on women's football, not only in England but in Europe going forward?
Just a massive impact. I think you can specify women's football, but I just think football in general. I think the fact that it's changed the way we look at the game. That first of all, you can go to a game where you can go in a civilised atmosphere and not be worried about, national anthems being booed or other unsavoury incidents, the players behaving. It was great to watch and quite refreshing, but there's a massive appetite for it now, certainly in England, and I think in Europe as well. We look at the tendencies, and I think the game itself has been kind of caught by surprise a little bit because, as we know, the Women's Super League, the WSL, so they don't all play at great grounds. The Man United team don't play at Old Trafford. The Man City team play at the mini stadium at the Etihad. So I think the clubs are going to be surprised by the interest that is developed by the Euros. I think that a lot of the stadiums probably aren't big enough. Now, hopefully, that interest will be sustained. But I was walking to and from the game last night, and the amount of mums and the daughters was staggering, really, because you see women and girls at Premier League games, but you don't see them in that volume. And whether it's because they're put off by sometimes the trouble or the atmosphere, I don't know, but there's a massive audience there waiting to be attracted back to the game. So that's one thing that football has to get right. But secondly, the women's game now in England, they need to develop on this. They need to work out whether they can challenge the US and win the World Cup next year or beyond that. Now, there are issues in the pipeline that the FA have identified in the sense that there's a bit of a problem with diversity in the England team, which is they've identified in terms of the inner cities and kids from, less affluent backgrounds finding the pathway. And they've found a problem then, they're trying to correct it. So there may be a bit of a block in the production line in the next few years. But England now is a powerhouse in women's football. And I think that the money in the game in this country and the resources they can put behind it will mean that I think in the next 5 to 10 years, they will challenge the US as the major nation in the world in women's football.
What struck me, Shaq, when I moved here from Europe was the opportunities that girls had in comparison to the girls back, for example, in England or Spain, in that it was much more available here. And it seems that soccer as a whole to that younger generation. The hope, I suppose, from an English perspective and indeed around the continent will be that this can be a catalyst now to address that.
Yeah, and representation matters. And it means more than we can quantify for young women and girls in England to see women playing sport at the highest level and representing their country in the manner that they did. You cannot underscore how important that is for the next generation. Now, the question becomes how does the football family, how does the FA best continue to support that growth? And Mark is absolutely right. How can you continue to get into inner cities? How can you get into some of those minority communities that have been neglected in a way that they are no longer in the men's game? That, for me, is the first challenge. And then I think what's most needed from there is men like us to back off, allow women to dictate what's needed in their game, how they would like to see the game grow, and we support that. That is absolutely vital because there is this want or this temptation to draw a parallel between the men's and the women's game by those of us who've been involved in the men's game for all our lives. When it is, I say this respectfully, I think it's two different, it's two different entities. Allow the women to dictate what's best for them, and how can we support them in those efforts? That's what's needed from us. Let that game develop in a way that suits it best.
Go on, Jan.
And yeah, it was good, and that was a good signal that 3 of 4 teams in the semi-finals were led by women. That the coaches, that the leaders are women. And Shaka was saying the football family. Football family has been an expression that corrupt leaders have used in the big organizations. But now for the first time, I think the last years we can say a football family, because I saw an overview that the 3 most crowd in Europe, the 3 best games, biggest crowds, it'd be in the women's game. Yeah, you have it there. Thank you. highest attendance, and I think that is something to do with getting role models, getting respect, and all, as the boys are saying. But another thing is that we, as football so-called experts, should stop saying that the level is getting so good, the level is good. There is a development all the time in male football and in female football. I mean, we're talking about Pop. Yes, great striker. But Wambach, the American striker, she was that kind of type. There is always new players coming forward. Birgit Prinz, German dribbler back in the days and all that. So I don't think we should be surprised that the football is developing. I think some of the games we saw at this tournament was class. It was just fun to watch. And I think what we've learned now, we're not talking about male or female. We just see good, intense football games.
Nedum, obviously, when you were playing here in MLS, well, I know you got to know some of the US women as well. They're going to be slightly worried, aren't they, that their dominance when it comes to World Cups going forward could be under quite a bit of pressure if England and other countries can put in the same sort of resources.
Dan, I think you've lived in America too long to believe that the US women's national team be worried about anyone. You know, their belief is that they are the best in the world, and they don't think that because England won the Euros that all of a sudden their throne's under threat or whatever. Like, they're a very good side, and I think, you know, some of the points we've been making there about the tournament itself. I think one of the biggest keys for this tournament wasn't the fact that, you know, it was held in England. It's the fact that it was held in England and shown on the national broadcast. Like, when it was being seen on BBC, I think the audience for the final was 17 million. Obviously, it helps the fact that England were there. But of that 17 million, it's not like the type of audience who would pay a subscription service to be watching football on a week-to-week basis anyway. So that level of visibility that's now out there, I think it shows to people, like, for example, Lucy Bronze she finished second place in Ballon d'Or in 2019. So people might have heard her name, but now they've seen Lucy Bronze play as well, and they've seen her play for England. Even for myself with my two daughters, like, they'd only ever really seen me play another men's football play, but I try and take them to women's game to see that football is a game for everyone. And I think as well, one thing to say, like, I will watch a Premier League game, I'll watch a German game, I'll watch a game down the road in the city that I live in. Like, there are so many different types of football, and if you love the game, you will watch the game. Yeah. You don't turn your back on a game because it's being played by women. You don't turn your back on the game because it's being played by people who maybe aren't as good. You just know what it's going to look like. If you want a really technical game, maybe you watch an Italian. If you want a physical one, maybe you're watching League One, League Two in England. You know, this is the beauty of the game of football. It's played in so many different ways, and I think this tournament that we've just seen there, we've seen some incredibly talented players, and those players play in the WSL. They play in the leagues around Europe. They play in the UEFA Women's Champions League. Like, when you showed the stats for those crowd attendances, I think first I've got to mention that's incredible, but that's because some of those teams are directly linked to Barcelona and alike. But come down and watch Brighton versus Birmingham, you know, because there's some really good players as well within that WSL who need that exposure, who want to try and develop. And unfortunately, the way that football works and life works, it's led by money. And if some more funding can come in, then the product itself will continue to get better and better and better, because for all the great teams and moments that we have, it's not the same all the way through. But if we can all get behind it, and, you know, we can listen to what they need and really see the differences between, say, the infrastructure in men's football and what's lacking in women's football, then maybe it can get to a point where all the teams from top to bottom are as competitive as we see in the big leagues in around men's football in Europe and alike. But overall, tournament's been an incredible success. You know, and like I say, it was great to see the sort of reaction, because the biggest news in England today was the fact that the women won the European Championships, and 17 million people saw it live, and even more saw it afterwards. So, you know, credit to the organisers and everybody who made it happen.